Hello and welcome to the end of the year. Today I'm going to be talking about the best books of 2021 for me. It's a relatively short list. 2021 was not my best reading year overall, but I was really excited to see, going back through my list, that I had read some really great books this year that I'm excited to share. So these are in no particular order. I guess they're in chronological order, so I'm going from last January to now. They are exactly 50-50 nonfiction and fiction, with a lot of genre fiction in there. So that's sort of an exciting discovery for myself, that I really enjoyed some sci-fi and fantasy this year. Anyways, let's just get started with the list. So in January I read The Great Pretender by Susannah Cahalan. I had previously read a book by her, which was a memoir called Brain on Fire, and that book brought up a ton of questions I had about sort of the definition of madness. It seems like Cahalan also had some of the same questions, because her next book focuses on this experiment done in the mid-1970s, where a professor at Stanford got himself admitted to a mental hospital, basically by saying he's hearing these auditory hallucinations, and then the idea was he didn't do anything in the mental hospital to make it seem like he was crazy. He just acted as per usual, and he waited to see how long it would take for the staff to realize that he was in fact a sane man. And this study made a huge splash when it came out. It's still taught in psychology textbooks, and she sort of goes on a journey of discovery with this study to figure out the story behind it, I guess. I don't want to do any spoilers. This book is written a little bit like a mystery in some ways, but it was very interesting, and it hit on a lot of these topics that I was really interested in following up on from the first book. So that was one of my favorites last winter by far. The next book that I read and loved was Disfigured by Leduc. This is sort of a short-ish essay collection about how disability and disfigurement are used in fairy tale throughout time. So starting from pre-Grimm brother fairy tales to Disney. She talks about how disfigurement is used to indicate certain character traits in fairy tale characters. Her take is very insightful because Amanda Leduc is also disabled. I think Disfigured is a must-read for anybody interested in fantasy and fairy tales in general. Just sort of for more deep literary analysis of what fairy tales do in our modern society, I guess. Highly recommend. Next up, we have Exhalation by Ted Chiang, which is a short story collection of sci-fi short stories. Ted Chiang is the author of the novella that became Arrival, which was an awesome movie if you haven't seen that either. But that one is not in this collection. These short stories are actually quite hard to describe. But basically Ted Chiang is very good at setting up a premise that's like one or two steps further from where we are in modern society. Like the technology is very recognizable in a lot of the short stories, and he does a really good job of sort of playing out the repercussions of those new technologies in, I think, a realistic and thoughtful way. It's a very philosophical book. I will say that Ted Chiang is not the best at writing dialogue. That I found that sort of amusing throughout the whole thing. But if you want sort of a more brain teaser type sci-fi, I really strongly recommend this short story collection. After that, I read Tess of the Road, which is a fantasy novel by Rachel Hartman. And Tess of the Road is a really interesting book because it is a fantasy novel. It has all the fantasy elements. We have dragons. We have these weird fantastical creatures called quiggatles, and it is sort of a medieval inspired fantasy world. But I think that the main issues addressed in this book, and sort of the main thrust of the plot, in a lot of ways reflects more realist fiction. So I can imagine that this book might be a little bit difficult to place. Like if you really love fantasy, you might not be very excited by sort of a lot of the major plot elements, but if you're into realist fiction, you might be sort of turned off by the fantasy world. That being said, I loved this book. I thought it was great. Basically, we have Tess, who's our main character, and in the beginning, she's really struggling with finding her place in her family. She's sort of known as the troublemaker of her family. So she sort of goes on a finding herself type of journey and meets up with her friend who is a Quiggle, which is a dragon-like creature who's very good at making tinkering, I guess. So that's the fantasy bit, but it's really a lot about Tess learning about herself and her past and dealing with emotions. I don't know how much is a spoiler, so I'm not going to go on, but it is a very good book. I do recommend it if you're like fantasy skeptical, but interested. I think it could be good for you. I think it could be good for fantasy readers in general. It does have that that vibe. It just sort of has a different journey from the standard hero's journey, I guess. I'm really excited. I think she has another book in the series coming out at some point in time. I need to check in on that because I think it was supposed to be published like last year or something, but I think delays, COVID, blah, blah. Okay, anyways. And then next up, I did actually participate in the nonfiction BookTube Prize semifinal rounds, which I did not post about because that was sort of during my big, long BookTube hiatus, which hopefully we're ending now. That's the plan. So out of all of the BookTube Prize books that I read, the one that really, really blew me away was Red Comet. And if you haven't seen it, Olive has already done an extensive review of this book, but basically this is a biography of Sylvia Plath looking at both her life and her work. So I think it is a really compelling look at both of those things. I think a lot of the times when you think of Sylvia Plath, you think of sort of a caricature. This book really fleshed her out and made me understand her life in a much more meaningful way. I also think that it is a wonderful and scathing portrait of the 1950s. I thought that was sort of probably one of my favorite parts, was just sort of seeing what it was like being a creative person or a creative woman in the 1950s. Seemed awful, honestly, but I loved this book. I mean, The Bell Jar was a very formative book for me, so I had some personal connection, I guess. But again, I would recommend this book to anybody, even though it's very long and a little bit too long, maybe. I think it could easily be cut down by 20% and lose none of the value, but it was still such an amazing book. I would still recommend it to everybody. Okay, sixth book on this list is Middlemarch. Middlemarch is a book that I was supposed to buddy read with Milena over at Milena Reads, and I really fell down on that. I finished it like 3 months after her, and we have not chatted about it yet. So I feel bad about that. However, Middlemarch was amazing. I was having a hard time focusing on sitting down reading fat books at the time when I was reading this, so I ended up reading an audiobook. I would really like to go back and read it in paper, not hardback, in like, like reading. Anyways, I would love to do that because I feel like I missed some of the beautiful language that George Eliot uses. I think that I would maybe get more out of it reading it a second time with my eyes. However, it was a really amazing book. Basically, Middlemarch is about a small community called Middlemarch, and it follows a couple of different characters as they grow and develop and get married and fall in love and fall out of love and all that good stuff, all that good old school marriage novel stuff. I really found Dorothea pretty insufferable as somebody to read about, and I loved Rosalind. Rosalind is objectively awful, but I just love her. She was so great. I just love a brat in literature. Like give me a brat any day. They're so much more interesting than like a God-fearing, moral woman. Anyways, so that was a great book. Again, a classic. I am excited to read it again in the future. Hopefully I'll get even more out of it next time. That's it. Okay, and then number 7 is Ancillary Justice, which I think I read sometime in October. This is a sci-fi novel about Breck, who is a part of a AI. How do I explain this? Ancillary Justice is about Justice of Torrent, which is a ship AI who is passing itself off as human in the form of one of its ancillary units, who's named Breck. You don't necessarily know this in the beginning of the novel. Hopefully that's not too much of a spoiler. Breck is sort of on a journey of revenge at the beginning of the novel. This is a very fast-paced, plotty, interesting sci-fi book. It got a lot of hype when it first came out because one of the species or races that is in the book doesn't use gender in their language or have a concept of gender in their society at all. When Ancillary Justice came out, that was very revolutionary, I think. It doesn't read as like such a main thing now. I think it's sort of honestly a side point, but the plot is just so good. It's just so well written. It's just such a great adventure story. I enjoyed it so much. I have the 3rd book on audio right now. I'm excited to listen to it. Loved that book. Last but not least, during Nonfiction November, I read The Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green. And I was sort of hesitant to read this one because John Green is a very big deal on YouTube and in the book universe and everything. And I sort of was worried it was overhyped and also felt a little bit like I shouldn't read like the super overhyped, like super popular essay collection as somebody who like actively seeks out essays to read. I was like, oh, I'm setting myself up for disappointment. But it was not disappointing. It was very, very good. Basically, the premise of this essay collection is that John Green is reading different experiences in the Anthropocene. Like, you know, in our era of life on Earth, I guess. So there are a lot of different things he rates, including, I think, Canadian geese, sycamore trees, Dr. Pepper, these things. But of course, all of these ratings sort of linked back to his personal experience with the object or experience or piece of art or whatever. And I thought a lot of them really actually got at a core bit of what it is to be human in some way, which I hope isn't overselling it, but the essays are like short and very digestible and profound. I mean, I feel weird calling something profound, but they were very good. Okay, so that's number 8. That's my last good book of the year. I mean, I read other good books. These are the great books. Thank you so much for watching. I'm going to be coming out with another video next week talking about my channel and reading goals for 2022. So look forward to that one. And I hope all of you had a great holiday season and a happy new year. And I'll talk to you later. Bye.